I revealed my wife's cruel mockery, rose from silent betrayal, and walked away from 7 years of marriage with fierce strength and reclaimed dignity. The image I had of my marriage shattered that afternoon. For 7 years I had believed we had built something special. Mutual respect was what I valued most in our relationship. That afternoon changed everything. I had come home earlier than expected. The regional meeting had been canceled, giving me a rare opportunity to surprise my spouse with her favorite takeout. As I placed the bags on the kitchen counter, I heard laughter coming from the backyard. She was on the phone, probably talking to one of her gym friends. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name mentioned, I instinctively paused. "You should have seen his face when he tried to lift those boxes yesterday," she said between fits of laughter. "Those skinny arms of his couldn't even handle my workout warm-up. I swear, sometimes I wonder why I married someone who looks like he'd snap in a strong breeze." The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands began to tremble as I continued listening. She went on describing how embarrassed she felt introducing me to her gym friends last month. Apparently, they had all shared a good laugh at my expense afterward. For the next 20 minutes, I stood frozen in place as she continued mocking various aspects of my appearance. The woman I had supported through graduate school, whose business venture I had funded, was treating me like a punchline. Each word carved something out of me that I wasn't sure I could ever get back. When she finally ended the call and came inside, I had composed myself enough to act normal. She smiled, completely unaware that I had heard everything. I returned the smile, but it felt like wearing a mask. That night, I barely slept, replaying her words over and over in my mind. The following morning, I went through our usual routine. She kissed me goodbye before heading to her expensive gym membership that appeared on our credit card statement each month. Once alone, I began looking at our life through a new lens. The designer clothes, the luxury car, the lavish vacations, all provided by the career she seemingly had so little respect for. The same career that kept those skinny arms behind a desk instead of at the gym. That weekend, we attended a dinner party with her gym friends. I watched carefully as she introduced me, noticing the knowing glances they exchanged. One of them even made a joke about needing help moving furniture, followed by a comment that they'd better ask someone else. My spouse laughed the loudest. On the drive home, she chatted excitedly about how much everyone liked me. The disconnect between her words and reality made me feel like I was losing my mind. Had it always been this way? Had I been blind to the disrespect for years, or was this something new? When we arrived home, she reached for my hand as we walked to the front door. I allowed her to take it, but something had fundamentally changed. The touch that once brought comfort now felt hollow. As she drifted off to sleep that night, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her yet. First, I needed to understand the full extent of what I was dealing with. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. After she left, I sat in our home office staring at our joint financial accounts. The business degree she had mocked at dinner had taught me a thing or two about managing assets. Perhaps it was time to put that knowledge to use. If my physical strength didn't impress her, maybe another kind of muscle would. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Each disparaging comment, every financial contribution, all the sacrifices I had made for our marriage. By lunchtime, I had filled several pages with notes. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about 7 years of my life invested in someone who didn't value me. The pain was evolving into something else entirely, something with purpose. That evening, when she returned home, she noticed my unusual quietness, but attributed it to work stress. She suggested I should join her at the gym sometime to blow off steam. The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I nodded and said I'd think about it. Little did she know I was already developing a different kind of strength training program. The following weeks became an exercise in restraint and observation. I maintained our normal routine while quietly documenting the pattern of disrespect that had somehow become our marriage. Each morning, I'd kiss her goodbye as she headed to the gym in designer workout clothes purchased, with a credit card linked to my account. Each evening, I'd listen to stories about her day, now hearing the subtle digs that had always been there. One Tuesday evening, she invited her gym friends over for dinner. I offered to cook, which earned appreciative comments from our guests about how lucky she was. As I served the meal I had spent hours preparing, I caught her rolling her eyes when one of her friends asked if I always did the cooking. "He's much better in the kitchen than the weight room," she replied with a laugh that everyone except me joined. Another piece of evidence for my growing file. After dinner, I excused myself to take a work call and retreated to our home office. The call was brief, but I remained there, listening through the partially open door as their conversation shifted once they thought I was out of earshot. Seriously though, how do you handle it? He seems sweet, but my trainer would have a field day with him, one friend commented. The financial portfolio makes up for the physical one, my spouse replied to uproarious laughter. Besides, have you seen our house? Sometimes you have to compromise. My hands curled into fists as I fought to maintain my composure. The woman I had built a life with saw me as a compromise, a financial resource to fund her lifestyle while she secretly resented my physical appearance. I quietly opened my laptop and added this conversation to my documentation. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor, under the guise of retirement planning. Instead, I questioned him about asset protection and division in case of divorce. His eyes showed recognition of a familiar conversation, but he maintained professionalism as he outlined my options. By the end of our meeting, I had a clearer picture of where I stood financially and what steps I needed to take. That weekend, she suggested a shopping trip together. As we walked through high-end stores, she selected clothes for herself while occasionally holding up items for me with comments like, "This might make your shoulders look broader," or "Vertical stripes are slimming but also lengthening." Each suggestion came with a smile that I once thought was helpful but now recognized as condescending. In the fitting room, I examined my reflection. I wasn't a bodybuilder, true, but my body had carried me through life reliably. The same body that worked long hours to build our comfortable lifestyle. The same frame that held her when she cried after losing her father 3 years ago. Suddenly, I felt a surge of anger, not just at her mockery, but at myself for internalizing it. I declined all her suggestions and instead purchased a well-tailored suit that the salesperson assured me fit perfectly. The price tag made her raise an eyebrow, but she said nothing. After all, I rarely spent money on myself. That evening, as she scrolled through social media, I noticed her lingering on posts from a particular gym trainer, the same trainer she had mentioned frequently in recent months, the same one whose private sessions appeared on our credit card statement twice weekly at rates that seemed excessive even for personal training. Curiosity piqued. I made another mental note to investigate further, not out of jealousy, but as part of my growing case file. The next morning, I called my office to say I'd be working remotely again. After she left for her training session, I began a deeper dive into our finances. The results were illuminating. Over the past year, her spending had increased by nearly 40%, primarily on fitness-related expenses, clothing, and social outings with her gym circle. More concerning were several cash withdrawals that coincided with her girls' trips, withdrawals she had never mentioned. The amounts were substantial enough to raise questions, but not large enough to have triggered my immediate concern until now. I spent the afternoon organizing financial records, taking screenshots, and compiling a spreadsheet that tracked the growth of her spending against my income. The picture it painted was clear. While I built our financial security, she spent with increasing abandon, all while apparently viewing me with growing contempt. Later that week, I scheduled a discreet consultation with a divorce attorney. I didn't mention this meeting when I returned home to find her and her trainer having protein shakes in our kitchen. The trainer nodded politely in my direction before continuing their conversation about muscle groups I apparently needed to work on. I noticed his hand lingering on her shoulder a moment too long when he stood to leave. "You should really consider joining us sometime," she said after he left. "He's worked with beginners before." I smiled and said I'd think about it, knowing I was developing a very different kind of strength, one that would soon surprise them both. The pivotal moment came unexpectedly on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had come home early with a migraine, something that rarely happened. The house was quiet, and I assumed I was alone until I heard the shower running upstairs. Her car wasn't in the driveway. She should have been at her spin class according to the schedule magnet on our refrigerator. I found her gym bag on the bedroom floor, her phone beside it buzzing with incoming messages. I had never been the type to invade privacy, but something felt off. The notifications flashing across her screen were from the trainer. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. It wasn't locked, another sign she never expected me to look. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed new ones I hadn't even considered. There were not only countless messages mocking my appearance, but also explicit exchanges with the trainer that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Even more devastating were the group chat messages with her gym friends, where they had shared unflattering photos of me, taken without my knowledge, accompanied by cruel commentary. Poor thing doesn't even realize how pathetic he looks trying to help with the yard work. At least he's useful for paying the bills. Girl, you deserve someone who can actually fill out a t-shirt. My migraine intensified as I scrolled through months of similar messages. I quickly took screenshots, sent them to my own phone, and carefully replaced hers exactly as I'd found it. Then I retreated to the guest bedroom, claiming my headache had worsened when she finally emerged from the shower. She seemed startled to find me home but quickly composed herself. When she asked if I needed anything, I declined, saying I just needed to sleep it off. Sleep was impossible, however, as my mind raced through the implications of what I had discovered. The betrayal was more comprehensive than I'd imagined, not just emotional disrespect, but physical infidelity and public humiliation. The next morning I called the attorney I had consulted earlier and scheduled an emergency meeting. By noon I was sitting in his office, my phone open to the screenshots I'd taken. "This changes things significantly," he said, after reviewing the evidence. "Infidelity combined with financial exploitation gives us substantial leverage, but we need to be strategic about how we proceed." We spent the next 2 hours outlining a plan. I would need to gather more financial evidence, secure my assets, and prepare for the confrontation that would inevitably come. The attorney advised me not to reveal what I knew just yet. A premature confrontation could give her time to hide assets or construct counter-narratives. Over the next week, I methodically executed the attorney's recommendations. I opened separate accounts and transferred a legally appropriate portion of our savings. I documented every expense she had made using our joint funds, particularly those related to her affair. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and retirement accounts. I secured copies of our most important financial documents and stored them with a trusted friend. Throughout this process, I maintained a facade of normalcy at home. We ate dinner together, discussed mundane topics, and even planned a summer vacation we both knew would never happen, all while she continued her affair, apparently confident in my obliviousness. One evening, she mentioned that her trainer was offering a couple's fitness package. "It might be fun for us to work out together," she suggested with a smile that now seemed predatory rather than affectionate. "He thinks he could really help you develop a more athletic build." "That's thoughtful," I replied, matching her fake smile with one of my own. "How much does something like that cost?" She waved dismissively. "Don't worry about that. You work so hard for us. Consider it my treat." My treat, as if the money she planned to spend wasn't earned through my labor while she engaged in an affair with the very person she wanted me to pay to train me. The audacity was almost admirable. "I'll think about it," I said, returning to my laptop where I was actually reviewing the final drafts of divorce papers my attorney had prepared. That weekend, she attended what she described as a fitness retreat with her gym group. The credit card alert that pinged my phone showed a charge at a luxury hotel less than 30 miles away, followed by a high-end restaurant charge and a substantial bar tab. I forwarded each notification to my attorney. While she was gone, I used the time to photograph every valuable item in our home and compile a comprehensive inventory. I also scheduled appointments with 3 different real estate appraisers to determine the accurate market value of our house. When she returned Sunday evening, she was glowing with what she claimed were post-workout endorphins. She brought me a small souvenir, a protein shaker bottle with the retreat's logo, presented with an almost pitying smile. "Everyone asked about you," she said. "They were sad you couldn't make it." "Were they?" I asked, thinking of the group messages I'd seen mocking my absence from previous events. "Of course," she replied smoothly. "Next time, you should definitely come." I nodded, knowing there would be no next time. The foundation for my response to years of disrespect and months of betrayal was almost complete. My so-called skinny arms had been quietly assembling the weights that would soon come crashing down on her carefully constructed world. That night, I finalized my preparations. In 72 hours, the papers would be ready for service. In 72 hours, she would learn that physical strength isn't the only kind that matters. Sometimes the strongest muscle is the one that allows you to walk away with your dignity intact. The 72 hours leading up to the confrontation were surprisingly peaceful. Having made my decision, a strange calm settled over me. I went through the motions of our married life with detached precision, like an actor performing familiar scenes one last time before the show closes. My attorney called to confirm everything was in order. The financial documentation was comprehensive, the evidence of infidelity irrefutable, and the strategy sound. All that remained was timing the disclosure for maximum legal advantage. "Remember," he cautioned, "once you reveal what you know, things will move quickly. She'll likely become defensive, possibly hostile. Be prepared for that reaction. I assured him I was ready. At dinner that evening, she announced she'd signed us up for a couple's retreat at an exclusive resort the following month. The irony wasn't lost on me, her planning our future together while I orchestrated our separation. When she mentioned the considerable cost had already been charged to our joint credit card, I simply nodded. It's supposed to help couples reconnect, she explained, reaching for my hand across the table. I thought it might be good for us. What made you think we need to reconnect? I asked, genuinely curious about her perception of our marriage. She hesitated. Well, you seem distant lately. Always working, always tired. I thought maybe this would help us spend quality time together. The concern in her voice almost sounded genuine. Had I not seen those messages? Had I not tracked the hotel charges that aligned perfectly with her trainer's schedule, I might have believed her. Instead, I recognized the manipulation, the careful construction of a narrative where I was the distant workaholic, and she the neglected spouse seeking connection. That's thoughtful, I replied, my tone giving nothing away. The following morning, I received confirmation that all my financial protections were in place. Legally permissible funds had been secured in individual accounts, documentation of joint assets was complete, and my personal valuables had been relocated to a safe deposit box. Most importantly, the divorce petition was ready for service. That afternoon, she texted to say she'd be late, another special training session. I responded with an innocuous message about saving dinner for her. Meanwhile, I used the time to make final preparations at home, backing up all electronic evidence to multiple secure locations and confirming the appointment with a process server for the following day. When she finally returned home, flushed and slightly disheveled, she seemed surprised to find me still awake. I had prepared a glass of wine for each of us, a detail my attorney had specifically suggested to create a relaxed environment before the storm. "This is nice," she said, accepting the glass. "What's the occasion?" "I've been thinking about what you said about reconnecting," I replied. The words tasted bitter, but I maintained the performance. "Maybe you're right." Her smile was triumphant, though she quickly masked it with affection. "I'm glad you're open to it. The retreat will be amazing. They have couples massages, private cabanas." I let her continue describing the luxuries I would never share with her. Each extravagance she mentioned represented another charge on the financial statements my attorney had compiled. That night, I slept in the guest bedroom, claiming insomnia I didn't want to disturb her with. In reality, I couldn't bear the performance of intimacy knowing what the next day would bring. Morning came with tense anticipation. I left for work at the usual time but returned home at 11, parking down the street to avoid detection. At precisely noon, I watched from the window as the process server approached our front door. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a series of increasingly frantic texts. "What is this? Call me right now. Why are there divorce papers?" I didn't respond. Instead, I started the car and drove to the neutral public location my attorney had suggested for the inevitable confrontation, a coffee shop where emotional outbursts would be constrained by social pressure. As expected, she called 17 times in the 20 minutes it took me to reach the cafe. I settled at a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, ordered a black coffee, and finally responded with a single text containing only the address. 26 minutes later, she burst through the door, divorce papers clutched in her hand, face contorted with rage and disbelief. She spotted me immediately and stormed toward my table. When she reached me, she slapped the papers down with enough force to spill my coffee. "What the hell is this? Some kind of joke?" Several patrons turned to stare, exactly as my attorney had predicted. The public scrutiny immediately caused her to lower her voice as she slid into the chair across from me. "Is this your idea of a sick prank?" she hissed, leaning forward. I took a deliberate sip of what remained of my coffee, letting the moment stretch until her discomfort grew. Then I placed my phone on the table, screen up, open to the gallery of screenshots I had collected. "No," I finally answered, turning the phone toward her. "This is no prank." Her eyes widened as she recognized the messages, her own words mocking me to her friends, her explicit exchanges with the trainer, the evidence of her betrayal laid bare in her own language. The color drained from her face as she realized the precarious position she now found herself in. "We need to talk about this at home," she whispered urgently, trying to regain control. I shook my head slowly. "No, we don't. Everything that needs to be said is in those papers. My attorney will handle all communications going forward." For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed completely at a loss for words. The carefully constructed image of control she had maintained throughout our marriage crumbled as she scrolled through message after message, seeing her betrayal through my eyes. When she finally looked up, tears had replaced the anger in her eyes. "Please," she said. "We can fix this. I can explain." I had anticipated tears, had braced myself for this moment of practiced vulnerability. My attorney had warned me this would be the most difficult part, when the manipulation shifted from arrogance to apparent remorse. "I'm sure you can explain," I replied evenly. "But that explanation won't change anything." As those words left my mouth, I felt the weight of years of disrespect begin to lift from my shoulders. The confrontation wasn't finished. Legal battles lay ahead. But in that moment, surrounded by strangers in a coffee shop, I reclaimed something essential that had been slowly stolen from me over years of subtle degradation. My worth would no longer be measured by her standards or diminished by her mockery. The strength she had failed to see was now firmly directed toward my own protection and recovery. The days following our coffee shop confrontation unfolded exactly as my attorney had predicted. First came the desperate attempts at reconciliation, tearful phone calls, emotional text messages, even an elaborately arranged delivery of my favorite meal with a handwritten apology note. I maintained silence, directing all communication through legal channels. When the emotional appeals failed, her approach shifted dramatically. Tears gave way to threats. Apologies transformed into accusations. She claimed I had overreacted to harmless jokes and misinterpreted her relationship with the trainer. According to her revised narrative, I was controlling, paranoid, and attempting to punish her for having friends and interests outside our marriage. My attorney forwarded each communication with clinical detachment, noting how predictable her tactics were. "This is textbook," he commented. "First they appeal to your emotions, then they attempt to rewrite history. When the court date approaches, expect another shift." He was right. 3 weeks after being served, as our first court appearance loomed, she unexpectedly appeared at my temporary apartment wearing the dress I once said was my favorite, hair and makeup done exactly as on our wedding day. The visual manipulation was transparent, but still momentarily disorienting. "Please," she said before I could speak, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I agreed to 5 minutes in the building's common area, a public space with security cameras, as my attorney had always advised. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, voice carefully modulated to project sincerity. "I made terrible mistakes. The things I said were inexcusable and I hurt you deeply. I understand why you're angry." I remained silent, waiting for the pivot. But throwing away 7 years over some stupid texts and a misunderstanding seems extreme. We built a life together. We have history, plans, a home. All relationships hit rough patches. Infidelity and systematic disrespect aren't rough patches, I finally responded. They're choices you made consistently over time. She flinched at the word infidelity but quickly recovered. Nothing physical happened with the trainer. The messages were inappropriate flirting, yes, but it never went beyond that. I can prove it if you just talk to me instead of these lawyers. I almost laughed at the boldness of the lie. The hotel receipts, the matching schedules, the explicit messages planning their encounters all safely documented. "The court date is set," I said, standing to indicate our 5 minutes were finished. "I have nothing more to say outside of those proceedings." Her expression hardened, the mask of contrition slipping. "You have no idea what you're doing. When this gets ugly, and it will get ugly, remember you chose this path." "Actually," I replied calmly, "you chose this path years ago. I'm just finally walking away from it." 2 days later, I received notice that she had retained one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the state, an expensive power move intended to intimidate me. My own attorney seemed unfazed. "Expected," he said, "but ultimately futile. Our documentation is comprehensive, and the infidelity evidence is clear. Her attorney will recommend settlement once they review what we have." He was partially right. Less than 24 hours after receiving our evidence, her side sent a settlement offer that was shockingly favorable to me. Far more than my attorney had suggested we might achieve through litigation. It granted me the majority of investments and retirement accounts, while she kept the house with its significant mortgage. Most telling was the confidentiality clause preventing either party from discussing the grounds for divorce. "She's afraid of public embarrassment," my attorney explained. "The evidence becoming court record would damage her social standing with the very people she performed for. The financial concessions, are essentially payment for your silence. I took the document home to consider overnight. The next morning, I instructed my attorney to accept with one modification, removal of the confidentiality clause, not because I intended to publicize her behavior, but because I refused to be legally silenced as part of the price of my freedom. Her response came within hours, immediate acceptance of our terms. As I signed the final papers the following week, I felt an unexpected lightness. The muscles I had been tensing for battle gradually relaxed. The confrontation was ending not with a protracted fight, but with her retreat. Walking out of the attorney's office into the bright afternoon sunlight, I checked my watch and realized I had no appointments, no obligations, and, for the first time in months, no strategic moves to plan. The divorce would be finalized in 30 days. In the meantime, I had a life to reconstruct, one built on self-respect rather than external validation. The day our divorce became final was remarkably unremarkable. I received the email notification while waiting in line for coffee before work. 7 years of marriage officially dissolved with the clinical precision of a digital document. I read it twice, paid for my coffee, and continued with my day as if it were any other Tuesday. That evening, however, I allowed myself a private moment of reflection. I opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion and poured a single glass. This was indeed a special occasion, not a celebration of ending, but of beginning again. 6 months after the divorce, I accepted a substantial promotion that included relocation to our company's international office, a position I would never have considered while married. By the time my departure date arrived, there was nothing tying me to the city where I had spent the last decade of my life. The evening before my flight, I received one final message from her, the first direct communication in nearly a year. "I heard you're leaving the country. I hope you find what you're looking for." I read it twice, wondering what response she hoped to elicit. Whatever her intention, I felt none of the old emotions. Instead, I found myself genuinely wishing her well, not out of residual affection, but from the peaceful detachment that comes with complete healing. "I already have," I replied simply before blocking her number permanently. 6 months into my new life abroad, I received an email from my attorney. She had fallen behind on the mortgage and was facing foreclosure. She had attempted to petition the court to revise our settlement, claiming financial hardship. The petition had been swiftly denied. I closed the email without responding. Her struggles were no longer my concern, just as her opinion of my physical appearance was no longer relevant to my self-worth. The muscles that mattered most, resilience, self-respect, determination, had been strengthened through adversity in ways no gym could replicate. That evening, I attended a social gathering with new colleagues and friends who knew nothing of my past. When someone asked what had brought me to this new country, I simply smiled and said I was ready for a change. What I didn't explain was how completely that change had transformed me, not just geographically, but fundamentally. The man who once measured his value through someone else's eyes now understood his true strength. It had never been about physical appearance or financial assets, but about the capacity to stand firmly in my own truth and rebuild when necessary. The arm she had mocked had ultimately carried me toward a better life than I could have imagined, one where I was valued for exactly who I was, by others, and most importantly, by myself.